Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to day 4 of the Ramadan Dua Accelerator. Today's dua is not necessarily a dua in the way we know it, but I couldn't help but want to share it because I think the lessons that can be derived from this specific situation are so powerful and so heartwarming, and honestly something that every one of us need to hear. Start off by reading the verse, then translation, and we'll talk about the story and lessons. This comes from Surah Al-Mujadila, and it is the first verse. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد سمع الله قول التي تجادلك في زوجها وتشتكي إلى الله والله يسمع تحاوركما إن الله سميع بصير. And the translation is as follows. God has indeed heard the words of she who disputes with you concerning her husband and complains to God. And God hears your conversation. Truly God is hearing and seeing. Let's talk about the story. Who is this woman that Allah is saying Allah has already heard her complaining or disputing or arguing in other translations? This story, this verse, is referencing a woman known as Khawla bint Tha'laba. Khawla is a very, very powerful figure in Islam in that she would later be known as the woman for whom verses were revealed. And the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ would praise her for that because, subhanAllah, when you think about the fact that she complained to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about something and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought verses down just to address her specific complaint. That's extremely powerful. What was she complaining about? Khawla was married and some sort of dispute, fight, issue happened between her and her husband. In retaliation to that, her husband invoked a pre-Islamic form of divorce called dhihar. What was this divorce? Well, it was an extremely oppressive practice where essentially the man would say something along the lines of, now you are to me like the back of my mother. Meaning, I no longer see you as a wife. We're married, but I no longer see you as a wife, just as nobody would be interested in doing wife things with their mother. That's disgusting. It's to that extent. I'm so far removed from you that you are like, you are halal for me in the way that my mother's back is halal for me. But we're not actually fully divorced, meaning you cannot go through your iddah period and then go remarry. And not only that, you as a wife are still responsible to fulfill my rights. It was a very self-serving form of divorce in that it oppressed women and forced them into a divorce purgatory state where they had to relinquish their rights, but their husbands still had access to them. And that includes in the form of intimacy. And you can imagine how emotionally taxing and burdensome that would be to a woman. Khawla complains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about this. Obviously, it being such an extreme injustice. And then she goes to the Prophet ﷺ to further the complaint and understand what can be done about this. Well, at this time, there's not really anything understood from an Islamic perspective of whether the dhihar was allowed or not. And so the Prophet ﷺ, according to some accounts, tells her, you are no longer halal for him. Meaning, this probably will have to be considered a full divorce. So technically, he can't have his way with you. You guys are not halal for each other, meaning this is a divorce, and now it needs to move forward like a divorce. Well, Khawla doesn't feel that that makes full sense because it's an injustice and didn't take the proper avenues. And she goes back and forth with the Prophet ﷺ in a respectful way. Well, she continues to do that until Jibreel alayhi salam is sent down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these verses. And the verses then continue to essentially describe the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala feels about this particular type of divorce. So it says that essentially this is not considered divorce, that this is something that is indecent. It is how, let me see the exact word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as munkaran min al-qawl wa zuran, which is translated to indecent words and calumny. Essentially, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this isn't allowed. This isn't happening. This is wrong. And then he goes on to actually institute a punishment for it. This is what you have to do. This is now the only way to rectify the sin. And this includes either the freeing of a slave or a certain amount of fasting, 2 months of fasting. Or if they're not able to do that, to feed 60 needy people. And then reconciliation is encouraged between the husband and wife. Many lessons here. Let's start off first and foremost with the most heartwarming lesson. The reminder that even when we feel like people are not on our side, even when we feel like people are not recognizing the injustice that was done to us, when we feel hurt or harmed and it feels like there's nothing we can do to right the situation, do not ever forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears your complaints. He hears your pain. He sees that you're hurting and he will respond to it. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. This verse also reminds us that at the end of the day, even the Prophet ﷺ doesn't have the power to change things. He only made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah would then execute the change. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who ultimately is the changer of our conditions. And so he is the one that we should first and foremost seek to pour our trust into and seek the results from. Of course, you then go to the people who are the experts or the wise or whoever can help support us in that way. But don't depend on the individual human to change the condition, because they can only do that with the permission and will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's number one. Number two is look at how powerfully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to this one woman's cry against injustice. Not only does he get rid of this un-Islamic practice that only hurt and oppressed women, but he institutes a punishment to further ensure that people who engage in it are dissuaded, and essentially it's reinforced that this is something that cannot be done anymore. This is a long-standing cultural practice, so it needed a double whammy for it to start to dissipate from society. But subhanallah, if you notice what the punishment is, what is it? Free a slave, fast 2 months, feed 60 needy people. All of them are things that actually benefit us. Even in us attempting to rectify our sin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us an opportunity to erase our sin and then to gain more sins. And furthermore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the consequence to help society, because that meant that if people did engage in this wrongdoing, the consequence of it would be that more people would be free, more hungry people would be fed, people would be taken care of in society. SubhanAllah, if you even just take note of that wisdom of how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to win and wants goodness for us. And the last point is how beautiful it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala paves a way for reconciliation between the husband and the wife. Marriage is such an important relationship in our deen. It is a seat through which the rest of our descendants are able to come through. It is a way that we are able to propagate our deen throughout this world. It is a means of our personal protection from sin. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants our marriages to be healthy and beautiful. And so reconciliation is always the first route to go when things are getting a little testy and difficult in marriage. I hope that this specific episode was inspiring to you guys, and it just reminds you that no matter where you're at, if you are struggling, do not ever give up on dua. Do not ever give up on complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about your situation. Know that He hears you. He is a Sami', He is a Basir, He is the all-hearing, He is the all-seeing, He is in Mujib, He is the one who answers the call. He tells us in the Quran, Ujib da'wat ad-da'i idha da'ani, I answer the call of the caller when he or she calls me. Allah is always listening. Don't ever let yourself fall out of hope that is happening. That's the whole point of the series, is I want you guys to know, look at all these different examples of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answering du'as in some of the most unexpected and impossible ways according to our standards. And yet He did it, and He left it in this book for us so that we're able to look back at those examples and be reminded that, hey, if they were able to have their dua answered, then we can too, no matter how difficult our situation is. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope it was of benefit. If you haven't already, please like this video so it gets pushed out to more people in the algorithm, and subscribe for more. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.